Farm Bill, Forestry, will come to order. Welcome and thank you for joining today's hearings. After brief opening remarks, members will receive testimony from our witnesses today, and then the hearing will be open to questions. In consultation with the ranking member and pursuant to Rule 11E, I want to make members of the subcommittee aware that other members of the full committee may join us today. And we welcome you. Good morning. I would like to welcome you to today's hearing, 2022 review of the Farm Bill, Forestry. This hearing is an opportunity to hear from Chief Moore of the U.S. Forest Service and a variety of American industry, environmental, and forestry-focused organizations on their thoughts about what is and is not working from the forestry provisions of the 2018 Farm Bill, as well as about the other ways this committee can better support our forests, support the American workers they employ, and support regional economies that they keep afloat. Healthy forests, both public and private, are critical to our fight against the climate crisis, and we've seen the urgency of this fight as we prepare for and respond to yet another brutal fire season here in the United States. Forests not only sequester carbon pollution, but they can be critical in increasing land resilience to flooding, improving water quality, and promoting biodiversity. In addition, healthy forests support rural economies, like those I represent, by providing good-paying jobs across the tourism, recreation, logging, and forest product sectors. As such, Farm Bill programs that support innovation in wood products and efforts that make forest restoration more successful are key to promoting rural prosperity. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about what is working and where we need to make adjustments to the Farm Bill programs to protect the health of our forests, grow rural economies, keep Americans in good jobs, and combat the climate crisis. I now recognize Ranking Member, recognize the chair of the full committee if he'd like to make any opening comments. You'll excuse me. I now recognize Ranking Member LaMalfa, the gentleman from California, for opening remarks.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the hearing today and the opportunity to talk about something that's going to be very, very timely as of course, we're entering the heart of the fire season of 2022. I guess we have a fire season all the time anymore. So what we already have is 5 million acres have burned across the country with nearly 80 large fires currently burning. Forest Service Committee and those watching must understand that the West is facing a crisis. The Forestry Untitled Farm Bill must be used to increase the pace and scale of forest management. Rural and forested communities nationwide can either benefit from logging and proper forest management, or they will suffer from mismanaged forests that threaten them and their towns with wildfire. For decades, forest health has declined as active forest management has stalled or stopped even completely. The West has faced some of the most destructive wildfires in our nation's history just in the past several years. Our national forests have never been in more urgent need of increased management and restoration. In my district, Northern California, we've seen devastating wildfires in recent years, such as the Camp Fire in 2018 that destroyed the town of Paradise, and last year's Dixie Fire, right at 1 million acres. One fire, 1 million acres, as well as the loss of 2 towns, Greenville and Canyon Dam, completely. Across the West, we live with these challenges every day. Forest management has reached a crisis level and we must act accordingly and act now. The Forest Service needs to act like there is a crisis and cut trees, thin overgrowth of vegetation, and restore our forests. Tens of millions of acres are at risk of catastrophic wildfire every year. Nothing short of a fundamental change in mindset will fix this crisis. The Forest Service must aggressively cut trees. A 10-year plan aims to thin and do vegetation management on 20 million acres of National Forest System lands and an additional 30 million on other federal, state, tribal, and private lands. But the National Forest Service System consists of 193 million acres of land. So are we to sit and watch the remaining 173 million acres go up over the next 10 years? The Forest Service needs additional resources, tools, and authorities in place to do this needed work. Tell us now at this committee, delay is unacceptable, people's lives are at risk, the asset is at risk, wildlife is at risk, habitat, water quality, air quality, we know what the risks are and we have to live with them yearly. The Forest Service must make real progress to lessen the risk of catastrophic fire. Through the Farm Bill, this committee can require the Forest Service to do the work that is desperately needed and way behind, encourage better forest management, help mitigate wildfire, and grow opportunities for rural communities that rely on our forests as economic engines as they used to. Critically, we need to address the over-litigation of projects the Forest Service needs to do to protect forests from catastrophic fire. For example, just at the end of June, a federal court stopped 2 projects that the Forest Service planned to do in Idaho, one entirely in the wildland-urban interface. This example is duplicated across the West, ruining landscapes, putting lives at risk, and destroying rural towns. Over-litigation stops or slows necessary forest management, and sadly, many acres that were tied up in lawsuits have now been completely burnt. Ask the people of Feather Falls in Northern California. Destroying the forests and devastating downstream watersheds. Some of those forests will take hundreds of years to recover. Look at the fires in California that killed almost 1/5 of all the giant sequoias in the world, currently being threatened right now. The answer so far is wrap them with foil or put sprinkler systems out. Yeah, that'll help right now in the short term, but real work needs to be done. I'm glad I'm part of a piece of legislation to help do so, but it needs to happen now. The last recorded evidence of mass giant sequoia mortality occurred in 1297. That was the year that William Wallace defeated the English at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. This can't be stressed enough. Our public lands are facing a crisis, and the Forest Service must act now. Currently, more than 500 sequoias are being threatened in the Mariposa Grove near Yosemite National Park by the Washburn Fire. And while this is Park Service, not Forest Service, it's basically the same issues. Firefighters on the ground battling to save these trees and the town of Wawona, and I want to thank them for their efforts every fire season to fight the fires that threaten towns and our public lands. But more work must be done pre-fire season so firefighters are not placed in situations of catastrophic fire. These extremely hot and fast-moving fires are a direct result of poor management and make the firefighters' jobs more difficult and even more deadly. This must end. We must properly manage the forests. The Forestry title of the Farm Bill contains a variety of provisions. We must expand the management authorities in this law. For example, the 28 Farm Bill contained a renewal of the insect and disease categorical exclusion and expanded it to include hazardous fuels reduction. These should be increased in size dramatically. Our forests need it. For many acres, it is too late as they've already been destroyed by high-intensity wildfire. Public lands are currently not good neighbors. They are tinderboxes waiting to go up in smoke. So while the private sector is held to a higher standard if they have an accident or turns out they didn't, they get sued by the government. But nobody gets to have a say on when federal lands or other lands start a fire and affect private lands. This committee must expand the Good Neighbor Authority to encourage partnerships with the Forest Service and the states, counties, and tribes that are harmed most by fire. We must also coordinate with private industry to add value to the timber and the slash that must be removed from our public forests. 2018 Farm Bill modified the Community Wood Energy Program and contained a research and development program to help encourage new markets and infrastructure for forest products and advance tall wood building construction in the United States. But we must also open new mills and other facilities and ensure that they have a consistent, reliable source of federal timber to feed those mills over a period of time, at least 30 years. You're not going to build something and invest hundreds of millions of dollars if you can't count on a feedstock. The Forest Service needs to be behind guaranteeing that and not giving us roundy answers. The 2018 Farm Bill expanded authorities that have focused the landscape scale restoration program on cross-boundary restoration and authorized new tools that allow for the collaborative treatment of hazardous fuel loads on bordering non-federal lands. We must continue this progress by expanding partnerships and authorities that allow for increased landscape scale treatments. We are seeing landscape scale fires, the Dixie Fire, again, nearly 1 million acres, so we need forest management that can match that scale. Chief Moore, and to all our witnesses, our public lands are indeed facing a crisis. I know that's not news, but the reaction needs to be much stronger. As we begin the process of writing this next Farm Bill, what authorities need to be added or expanded to address the catastrophic fires that are threatening the West? I look forward to the answers. Madam Chair, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize Ranking Member of the full committee, Thompson, for any opening comments that he'd like to make.
Well, thank you, Chairwoman Spanberger and Ranking Member Lamoffa, and happy National Forest Week. I much appreciate today's hearing to review the forestry title of the 2018 Farm Bill, as it is a key interest to Pennsylvania's 15th Congressional District, the home to Pennsylvania's only national forest, the Allegheny. The forestry provisions have progressed in the past several farm bills and will again be an important part of the next reauthorization. As a former chairman of the Conservation, Energy, and Forestry Subcommittee, I can confidently say this committee worked hard in both 2014 and the 2018 farm bills to provide tools and authorities for the Forest Service to better manage our forests, increase partnerships, and encourage new markets for forest products. Given the challenges before the Forest Service and forest managers nationwide, the next farm bill must build on these reforms and provide additional authorities for those very same purposes and more. Although the recent infrastructure law provided more than $3 billion to the Forest Service for restoration and fire prevention activities, funding alone won't address the urgent needs that we have in forest communities and across the national forest system. If we truly are going to make progress on the tens of millions of acres that are overgrown and in need of immediate treatment, we need every tool available and consider others that will promote forest health and help meet our long-term management goals. Now, while some continue to call for reworking the conservation programs in Title II to emphasize climate benefits, forestry and management must also be a major part of that conversation. The Farm Bill's forestry title presents an enormous opportunity to generate climate benefits, though what I'd call natural solutions, and on a broad landscape scale. Through active management, we can restore our forests and reduce the intensity and risk of wildfire. Simultaneously, we can create stronger carbon sinks that will sequester even more carbon and forest products that indefinitely store it. According to the Forest Service, our forests are currently sequestering 14% of all U.S. emissions and could nearly double that through active management. Now, we can't have a healthy environment without a healthy economy and vice versa. And with that in mind, we also need to be doing more to allow for increased timber harvesting in the National Forest System. Sustainable harvests will encourage both forest health and the economic health of the forested communities in many rural counties. Chief Moore, thank you for being here today and sharing your perspective as we begin the 2023 Farm Bill process. Also, would like to welcome all of our witnesses on Panel 2 for your time and expertise today. And we look forward to today's testimony and working with you as we begin developing the next Farm Bill. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
The chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so that witnesses may begin their testimony to ensure that there is ample time for questions. I'm pleased to welcome two panels of witnesses to the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry of the larger Agriculture Committee today. On our first panel, our witness is Chief of the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Forest Service, Mr. Randy Moore. Mr. Moore is accompanied by Deputy Chief of the National Forest System of the Forest Service, Mr. Chris French, and Deputy Chief of State and Private Forestry of the Forest Service, Ms. Jalith Hall Rivera. Chief Moore, you now have 5 minutes to deliver your opening testimony. The timer should be visible to you on your screen and will count down to 0, at which point your time has expired. Chief Moore, please begin whenever you are ready.
Chair Spanberger, Ranking Member Lamoffa, and members of this subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you as my first time as Chief of the U.S. Forest Service. I'm joined today, as indicated, by my Deputy Chief, Chris French, the National Forest System's Deputy Chief, and as well as Jalith Hall Rivera, Deputy Chief for State and Private Programs. My testimony today will focus on the important role that the Farm Bill has played in providing authorities to carry out the agency's work, including with our partners to steward the nation's forests. The Forest Service, along with many of our partners, work together to sustain healthy, resilient landscapes for all the service and the nation's forests and grasslands provide. For instance, forests are America's largest terrestrial carbon sink, which indicated earlier. Our forests, plus harvested wood products and urban forests, offset almost 15% of the nation's total carbon dioxide emissions and almost 12% of all greenhouse gas emissions. The national forests alone are the source of drinking water for more than 60 million people living in 3,400 different communities across 36 states. The value of $367 billion to the city of Los Angeles alone. Forest products play a key role and an important role. In fiscal years 2021, the National Forest generated 2.9 billion board feet of timber. That's enough to build 180,000 new single-family homes. The main way that Americans enjoy and use their national forests and grassland today is for outdoor recreation. We have 370,000 miles of roads to give people access to their favorite spots. Our visitors have 159,000 miles of trails that they can use across the landscapes of all kinds. In 2020, the National Forest System supported more than 370,000 jobs and contributed more than $35 billion to the GDP. Past farm bills have provided and expanded on various authorities that have given the agency and our partners critical tools for managing forests for many goods and services that they provide to the public. These tools have been instrumental in accomplishing our collective work on the ground. For instance, the Stewardship Contracting Authority, which was reauthorized in the 2014 Farm Bill, has promoted closer public-private working relationships by using the value of timber or other forest products to offset the cost of restoration activities. Over the past 4 fiscal years, use of this authority has resulted in over 1/2 million acres of hazard treatment in the wildland-urban interface, 750,000 tons of biomass for energy production, and nearly 400 miles of stream habitat restored for other services. In addition, Congress permanently authorized the Good Neighbor Authority in the 2014 Farm Bill. This authority allows the agency to more efficiently work with states to perform restoration on federal lands. And in 2018, the Farm Bill, Congress expanded G&A to include federally recognized Indian tribes and county governments, allowed funds received by the sale of timber sales to be used by the state to accomplish additional work under this authority. To date, the Forest Service has completed 339 Good Neighbor agreements across 38 states, 9 tribal G&A agreements, and 7 agreements with counties to accomplish a variety of restoration work. Timber harvesting on the G&A continues to grow. 273 million board feet were sold in 2021 under this authority, and that's an increase from 89 million board feet in 2018. The 2018 Farm Bill also reauthorized the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, and it allowed for the agency to issue a waiver to extend existing projects up to an additional 10 years. The authority has allowed us to build partnerships and involve communities in the decision-making process. The Wood Innovation Grants Program, which was formally established in the previous Farm Bill, supports proposals that expand and accelerate wood products and wood energy markets to support managing the nation's forests. For instance, the program has helped catalyze U.S. growth in mass timber construction with over 1,400 buildings built, or either under construction or in design, and the rate is accelerating each year. The Forest Service is and will be using prior Farm Bill and other authorities to carry out the 10-year implementation plan associated with our wildfire crisis strategy to deliver funding provided through the bipartisan infrastructure law. A couple of examples include, in Central Washington, the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest will use, among other authorities, a G&A agreement with the state to reduce the risk on over 2 million acres over 10 years. In Oregon, the Deschutes National Forest using authorities under GNA and CFLRP and others to carry out an expected 50,000 acres of treatment over the next 3 fiscal years to reduce the wildfire risks to Central Oregon communities. Throughout implementation of the strategy, we will continue to work with our industry partners through programs like Wood Innovation Grants programs to develop new and innovative uses of wood and develop markets of biomass for small diameter material. In closing, I want to thank the committee for your efforts, and I look forward to working with you as the committee drafts the next Farm Bill. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. At this time, members will be recognized for questions in order of seniority, alternating between majority and minority members. You will be recognized for 5 minutes each in order to allow us to get to as many questions as possible. Please keep your microphones muted until you are recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Chief Moore, over the past couple years, the subcommittee has heard repeatedly about the promising developments and innovations from the wood and forest products industry that offer cost-competitive, durable, climate-friendly building materials, from nanocellulose additives for cement to cross-laminated timber. We really see that the forest industry is leading the way on decarbonizing our building sector. And in 2018, Congress authorized the Wood Innovation Grant Program at the U.S. Forest Service to help fund these sorts of innovations. So I would like for you to speak to what progress has been made since 2018 in the implementation of this program, what kind of products have been funded so far, and then comment about the current funding level, whether that's been sufficient to meet the demand.
So thank you, Chair. You know, the previous Farm Bill, let me start by saying that we have seen a lot of accomplishments under this bill, and we are so thankful to Congress for their foresight in passing the bill, and we look forward to the next Farm Bill. Looking at, you know, the Forest Legacy Program as an example, since its creation in 1990, the Forest Legacy Program has permanently protected about just under 3 million acres of lands as, that are considered to be working forested lands. And of those acres, over 80% remain in private ownership, protected under conservation easements. And these acres that are conserved through this program are really protected in perpetuity, and we continue to manage those as working forested lands. One other example, in looking at that program, we have invested in federal funds just under $1 billion that have been leveraged by an additional $1 billion in non-federal costs. And what this shows is that there's strong support both at the local level as well as the state level for the program. So we are having a lot of progress in this particular part of the program, and we look forward to continued work in these areas. In terms of the Wood Innovation Grants, that's one that this Congress should be, and this committee should be really proud of. It has been a catalyst for a number of new opportunities across the country. And I'll give you an example. Earlier in some of my testimonies, I talked about you know, we have a lot of small diameter, low value type material across the landscape, particularly in the West. And what we needed to focus on is wood innovations. And as I mentioned in my opening statements, so far, that program is really taken off. We have 14 new buildings that have been built using cross-laminated timber. And that's really has spurred a lot of development and a lot of support across the country for utilizing small diameter, low value material.
Could you, for those who might be watching who might not be familiar with some of what you're discussing, could you explain why that's important that you can utilize that small diameter, low value timber and what that might mean for forest landowners and for the forestry industry?
Yeah, if you look, let me focus primarily across the West right now, where we're having a lot of the unwanted wildfires across that landscape. And when you look at the type of material that a lot of our industries are set up, it's looking a lot at commercial saw logs and the larger trees, if you will. And what we have that has been growing on a national forest since 1935, it's a lot of small diameter, low value type material. And so this material is not really suitable for a lot of the infrastructure that we currently have in our country. And what we have been doing is cutting the small diameter, low value stuff, piling it up, and then burning it. And what we have been trying to push is wood innovation so that you could utilize this material that we are piling and burning. And so with the cross-laminated timber as an example, that market has really taken off. We are creating new industries across from the west to the southeast, where we are beginning to see production and facilities to utilize this type of material. We have been awarded grants to look at working with private industries to refine the technology with our research people. And I'm just happy to say that that is an industry that is beginning to really take off, and I see a lot of utilities in the future in terms of how it's going to help us remove some of that material off the landscape. You know, I'll give you an example why that's important, and then I'll cut. When you look at the types of ecosystems that we have routinely been managing, a healthy, resilient landscape would be about 40 to 60 trees per acre. What we currently have on these landscapes is anywhere between 800 or more trees per acre. And so if we're going to look at reducing the wildfire hazard potential, we have to remove a significant number of trees and other materials off the landscape. And so creating other industries to utilize the material, it just works. It creates jobs in small communities, but it also creates healthy and resilient landscapes, which
Thank you for that answer. Certainly, I think the program's tremendous and the benefit economically to communities, but also to forest health and certainly to the ability to build buildings using cross-laminated timber is tremendous. I'll follow up with written questions related to some of the funding and program dollars that have gone out the door so far. But thank you for your answer. At this point, I now recognize the gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief Moore, and your colleagues there for joining us. Chief, you know, we've known each other a long time, and you may remember about 10 years ago, the first time we met was at that park in Sacramento because we had a lockdown on the building we were supposed to meet in. You and I and Tom McClintock and a couple others were there. And so that's been 10 years. And so now, you know, I've seen lately where the Forest Service has devised a 10-year plan to treat 20 million acres of National Forest Service land and an additional 30 million acres of other lands. And so I'd kind of count that as we're 20 years in a way, you know. So the Forest Service oversees nearly 200 million, 193 million. So if the plan is to treat 20 million over 10 years, that's 10% of the total holdings. So on a per year basis, that averages out to 2 million per year. So basically, we're at the point where we're treating 1% per year, which is about the same, more or less, pace and scale, to use that terminology, which is important, as what we're already at, 1% per year. So that means instead of 10 years or 20 years, we're talking about 100 years just to get over the land one time, and if it can be applied to all that. It kind of reminds me of painting the Golden Gate Bridge. They never stop. They start at one end and they get to the other, only it isn't a 100-year cycle. So I've lost 3+ communities in my own district, and there's many more that are in the looking down the barrel of the gun of even more fires year in, year out. And my people at home are not going to be excited about a 1% per year treatment. This needs to be dramatically increased. And so in the plan also, it's talking about 30 million acres that are not National Forest System, but there are others, other fed lands, state lands, tribal, and private lands. Why is the focus 30 million acres on others when they should be doing that themselves? Why is the Forest Service intervening on developing or helping them when they are not even keeping up with more than 1% on their own? Why does that plan look that way?
So, Congressman LaMalfa, thank you for that question. You know, the best available science tells us that on average, you know, there's 80% of the risk exposure to buildings and wildland-urban interface occurs on less than 20% of the total landscape. And we also know that the size and placement of hazardous treatments, it matters and it makes a difference. And so when you look at treating 20 million acres of National Forest System's lands, that represents more than a 20% that would have a positive outcome on the 80% of exposure. The other piece, we use that same method to come up with the 30 million for private and other federal and state lands. It's the same method, and how we place treatments on the landscapes matters as well.
But why intervene on state lands, private lands, tribal lands that are not your jurisdiction?
Well, when you look at the fires and how it occurs on the landscape, it doesn't really care about jurisdictional boundaries. And so what we've been trying to do.
No, but those folks would be keeping up with their own if they were allowed to, especially private. You know, it's hard to get a timber harvest permit in California. I worked on that and got a little help. But private doesn't really need a lot of help other than the ability to go do it. We've had their lands burned extensively, so that we're going to need cooperation from Forest Service, so the private entities will have actually something to cut once the salvage period's over with on, some of these fire escapes. So why does the states need federal Forest Service help?
Well, again, Congressman, when you look at what's really happening, the majority of fires start on private lands. And we know that once fires start, regardless of where they start, that it doesn't care about boundaries. And so unless we can all come together to look at treating landscapes with multiple jurisdictional boundaries, we're not going to have the positive outcome on the ground that we need to have in order to have that fire behave. A lot of these landscapes in the West are created from fire, and in order to maintain that, we need to also continue to have fire, but not the unwanted wildfires that we are currently having. We also know that as we look at treating the landscape at a larger level, the treatment that works best is to go in and do thinning to remove some of those trees that I mentioned.
No, I got that, sir. 40, 50 trees per acre, mature trees is the right amount, not 500. So is the Forest Service actually engaging? We talked last year, at the end about you were assessing the damage from the fires and such, but what work is being done, to salvage the 1 million acres in the Dixie Fire and the other various fires at a timeline? When you talked about you get value out of the trees, we're talking the small diameter ones, but you can get value out of these trees. Let me ask you this more directly. Are your offices open yet? Because just a few months ago for Christmas tree permits, people couldn't even go into an office and walk in the door because everything's all shut down due to COVID situation. Are we fully engaged in having open offices and people doing work?
Congressman, I'd like to know where you are seeing offices closed. Our offices have always been open, and if they were not open, we've always had ways for people, the public, to come in and purchase permits of any kind.
I'll name a couple up in Northern California a little later then, but the bottom line, are they fully engaged in doing normal pre-COVID type work, out in the woods, handling paperwork in the offices that need to be done, and getting the permits out?
They are, and they have been.
Thank you.
I now recognize the Congresswoman Custer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sustainable forestry and conservation are in our blood in the granite state of New Hampshire. We're home to the White Mountain National Forest, and we appreciate all the Forest Service does to protect and maintain this treasured landscape. I want to appreciate our colleagues on both sides of the aisle talking about the impact of climate change in our forests today. We are the second most forested state in the country, right behind our friends in Maine. From wood products to outdoor recreation, forests are an essential backbone to our economy, and like Mr. LaMalfa, to my district. This hearing is a good opportunity to take stock of where we are as we look ahead to the 2023 Farm Bill. We secured a lot of forestry wins in the 2018 Farm Bill, the Great American Outdoors Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Package, but there are continuing challenges that we're discussing today that we need to address. In my state, our small forest operations need more outlets for wood products, particularly low-grade wood that can serve as a reliable, locally grown source for heat. And that's why I've introduced legislation like the Biomass Thermal Utilization Act. Our forests also remain vulnerable to invasive pests like the emerald ash borer, as well as to the effects, as I've mentioned, of climate change. We've seen an increase in temperature and a reduction in humidity in New Hampshire, and I know from a recent trip that that's exactly what's going on out in the west in Yosemite. The good news is that forests are the most powerful clean air technology on Earth, reducing the net amount of CO2 in the atmosphere as the trees grow. Public and private sector stakeholders continue to seek proactive ways to increase the climate contributions of working forests and forest products. but that requires reliable government data to inform these decisions. The Forest Service Forest Inventory and Analysis Program is the only source of forest data that is national in scope and consistent in measurement. I recently co-led a letter calling for increased funding for the FIA, which have been able to secure in the House spending package. Chief Moore, welcome. We're delighted to have you with us. How have you seen FIA forest carbon data benefit working for us? And do you have thoughts about how we can continue to strengthen carbon capture data collection and collaboration?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. And, you know, it's interesting that you bring this up because as I look into the future, the issues that you brought up is going to play prominently into what's the next iteration of America's forest in this country. And when we talk about climate and we talk about carbon sequestration, there's a huge role that we are still trying to venture into. FIA data is going to be one of the foundational pieces of this. I believe you're going to hear from the next panel some of the work that we're doing with different nonprofits and other groups in terms of looking at the FIA data, looking at what the opportunities are for carbon sequestration, and then how does the national forest play into this new system that seems to be emerging in this country. And I think some basic fundamental decisions need to be made is that if the federal government participates in that, what are the policies associated with that so that we don't create undue competition with the private landowner. So we are tiptoeing into this new era, and we would welcome Congress's involvement in this, as well as our continued participation with our partners.
Well, and I think for members, this is one of the very rare opportunities for bipartisan work in the carbon sequestration space, so I appreciate that. In this appropriation cycle, I also teamed up with Congressman Peter Welch from Vermont to secure $1.5 million increase in funding for the Community Forest Program in this year's House spending package. Again, Chief Moore, could you talk about the impact of the Community Forest Program and how it's enhanced conservation efforts around the country while supporting job creation?
Thank you. Yeah, so one of the advantages is that it would allow tribes to participate as grantees. And so that's one of the advantages and the amendments that we have into the program, and we welcome that. You know, since its creation, the Community Forest and the Open Space Conservation Program, we permanently protected over 27,000 acres through simple fee purchase. And I had mentioned something about conservation easements earlier. The conservation easements are not allowed to participate in this program. But the program targets private lands that are threatened by conversion to non-forest uses and those that are not held in trust by the United States, and also lands that can provide defined community benefits and at the same time allow public use. So this is a program that's not heavily funded, but the value that it provides is significant.
Well, I appreciate my time is up. I will yield back, but thank you again for your service.
Thank you.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Desjardins for 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes Mr. Allen for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Moore, and your colleagues for being with us today and talking about this that we've been talking about. I was elected and served in 2015, and we seem to be continuously talking about where we are and how to prevent these fires. Obviously, from a climate standpoint, trees need carbon, and so that's a good thing. And if we have a forest fire, obviously that produces carbon, which, you know, we understand is a problem. So we got to get a handle on this somehow. And how can, obviously, we increased funding. But something's out there that's keeping us from getting the job done. What can we do? What can we as Congress do to maybe it's just not money. Maybe it's, certain environmental issues or something like that that's really keeping us, like, for example, to manage forests, you got to build a road in there to manage the forest. And I understand we can't do that. and we're prohibited from doing that because we can't continue on like this because, like I said, it's not good for the environment. We need more trees, not less trees. And of course, in my state, we're 40% sustainable. I mean, we plant 40% more trees than we cut. So, and we don't have to deal with these fires because we have a wetter climate and we don't have those winds. But what barriers can we remove by legislation to make this happen and get this job done?
So, Congressman Allen, first of all, that's a very insightful question, and it's one that has been kind of a thorn for a long time. I would say that if I look at the regulations, we have all the regulations we need, and some would argue too many. But I think that Congress has provided us with an opportunity that we have not had in the recent past, probably in the last 70, 80 years. I think what we should be focused on now is how do we implement the opportunities that we currently have. And so we're committed to moving forward with that. In relation to your question about roads, it's my understanding that we can build roads, and in some cases we have to put them to rest after we finish the project that we built the road for. It just all depends, and what type of road do we build to go in if we're going to have a timber sale or something. So, but as you know, people complain about the number of roads we have, and can we maintain the number of roads that we currently have? And I think there's opportunities entering into agreements with counties and other entities where we could work together collaboratively to manage the road system that we currently have. But I'll tell you, we are not funded to handle the level of roads that we currently have in the system. So we would appreciate any insight or help that you, as Congress, would provide.
Okay, and that's for the maintenance of the roads?
Yes.
Okay.
Maintenance, just, when we have storms and stuff and you
Right.
have blowouts from water and those types of things.
Okay.
Sanitation.
In the southeastern United States, what are your main challenges that you face that would fall under your direction as far as our part of the country? And I represent the state of Georgia, Georgia 12.
Well, if I, it's always, do you have the funding to do the level of work that's needed to do out on the ground? And when I look at what the South has in abundance is that they have done a really good job of managing that ecosystem and the ecological conditions out there for different environments like the red-cockaded woodpecker or the pileated woodpecker or some of the other threatened and endangered species. And what we have done in the South is really work with our partners, that's those local community leaders and others to create these conditions. I think looking at the Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill, it has given us a lot of those tools to create those conditions. Even when I look at prescribed burning, the South contributes probably about 70% of all the burning in the U.S., and they've created those authorizing conditions there. And so while there's always opportunities to improve, I want you to know that the work that's taking place down there is really admirable. It's not to say that we can't do more, we can't do better, but right now, the work that's taking place there is kind of it's a perfect example of what we would try to achieve across the country.
All right, well, thank you, sir.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona for 5 minutes.
I want to thank the chairwoman and ranking member for organizing this meeting. I also want to thank Chief Moore and his team for being here today. Since your appointment, Chief, I believe that we have made headway on a number of important issues, along with the last few years of Congress's help to get us to where we're at today on many of those issues. I also want to highlight that, this Congress has been at this for a long time, as was just recognized a little while ago. And during that time, we have continuously, up until recently, cut the Forest Service time and time and time again. And we also have put hindrances in their way. We have fires to fight. We take staff and put them on fires up until the recent Farm Bill last time. But the underlying issue is that we have to work as a team. And that team has to work in realization of the demands that we have placed on the Forest Service to create such a fast change after years and years of neglect are difficult. And Chief Moore has been with us for a year now. And I think he and his team have done an outstanding job over that course of time. And here, the American Rescue Plan has put money forward, and the bipartisan infrastructure bill. But much more remains to be done, but I look forward to continuing this partnership moving forward. In 2018, we worked to ensure the Farm Bill created and strengthened conservation and forestry programs vital for rural Arizona and America. 5 years later, the nation is facing new challenges that are forcing action. Unprecedented dry conditions do not seem to be easing. Ready access to clean and reliable water for states like Arizona has become dire, and wildfires have grown in both scope and scale, now posing an even greater threat to local communities. Arizona's 1st Congressional District has not been spared. In addition to the immediate difficulties these fires cause for communities, wildfires can also dramatically change watershed processes, affecting stream flow and erosion. Often, if the watersheds aren't properly restored, communities are put at risk, and such as in Flagstaff during the recent couple of fires that have been up there. This same issue threatens much of Flagstaff now, with the burn scars left from the pipeline fire just several weeks ago and the monsoon season we are currently having. Chief Moore, the most significant projects to prevent catastrophic wildfires in northern Arizona is Forestry. This week I went to C.C. Cragen Reservoir in Coconino County and Forest in northern Arizona. This is a project with 64,000 acres with 35,300 acres eligible for mechanical treatment. Some of my comments are similar to Mr. Lamafa's. We don't have the manpower. We don't have the scale that's necessary. Part of that is the current hiring market. I know you're trying to hire people in forests throughout the West, but it's hard to get them on board right now. We're trying to find contractors, but after years and years of contractors not being around, we're having difficulty doing that. I know that the roads are expensive to put in, but you are trying to address that issue. And these delays and slow progress are threatening the ability to get the mitigation work done that is needed on a constant basis, actually. So, Chief Moore, first, how is the Forest Service responding to hiring challenges for full-time staff and contractors? Second, how can we utilize the Farm Bill to help support the industry that is needed for forest restoration work, like biomass, and finding markets for whether it's the biomass or the timber, and getting this done in a way on the scale that's going to be needed into the future. I know you can't turn it around in a year or maybe even 2 years, but we do need to turn it around with the help of all of us. Thank you.
Yeah, Congressman, thank you. So I'll start with the hiring piece. We're playing catch up over the last 20 years of what has happened to the agency. As our fire workforce has doubled in size over the last 20 years, we have lost about 40% of our non-fire workforce. And so we're playing catch up in terms of how we build and add capacity in the organization again.
And Chief, in order to have get us out into the field, we need that workforce also.
Yes, and that part of the 38% that I'm talking about is primarily from the field. And so we're moving in that direction. But I don't know if this is a secret within the government or not, but let me just share with you some of the complications that we have with hiring. First of all, we're playing catch up. And so when we go out and hire positions, the existing employees also want to compete for those positions so they can advance and promote upwards. And that's a good thing about the agency. What we have to pay attention to is how do we bring new people into the organization, and how do we expand our opportunities to work with community leaders and partners to build this back up, build that capacity up. We're never going to go back to where we were in terms of number of people, but we do think that through some of the authorities under the Farm Bill, like G&A and shared stewardship, that we're going to build that authorized environment through people in these communities to leverage and add capacity to do the work. And so that's our plan for looking at hiring and adding capacity back in order to effectively utilize the build monies and maybe other monies that may be coming down in the future.
Chief, I'm going to have to yield, or else I'm going to get a hook here. So, Madam Chair, I yield.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Desjardins for 5 minutes.
I missed something.
Mr. Desjardins, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
I have no questions today.
Thank you for your attendance at today's hearing, Mr. Desjardins. The chair now recognizes Mr. Kelly for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for having this important here. And Chief Moore, thank you for being here, and thank you for what you're doing for the Forestry Service. Expanding markets for timber and forest products are vitally important to both the family tree farmers and larger operations in states like Mississippi, where forestry contributes heavily to our economy and includes over 62,000 jobs. Domestic markets for wood products, as well as exports to Europe and Asia of wood pellets, have been bright spots for Mississippi tree farmers. Chief Moore, is the Forest Service doing what it can to encourage new markets, and are there things we should consider for the Farm Bill that would assist the department in developing new forest product markets?
Yes, the short answer is yes, but I'm going to have my Deputy Chief of State and Private Forest to respond to that.
Okay, thank you, Chief, and thank you for that question, Congressman. And as the Chief has previously stated, we are very much focused on expanding forest markets, and we talked a little bit about small diameter timber, which is of particular interest in the West. Your state in the Southeast, already there are robust timber markets there, as you know, but we are doing work to grow those markets, particularly around pellets, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, and we have work going on both in our part of the agency as well as with our international programs, because there's a lot of interest in the pellet market overseas, in Europe in particular, as well as Asia. And the southeastern United States is really set up well to be a purveyor of that forest product, and that is a really good connection with private forest landowners as well. So we're doing a lot of work there. We've had a number of dignitaries here from Europe and have just been taking them to your state and other states to show them how our sustainably managed forests in the United States are a really critical part of the pellet market for Europe and other places.
Thank you. And just, Chief Moore, just a comment. We spend lots of money and lots of time. I noticed you said 70% of the controlled burns are in the South and Southeast. It seems like that number should be 70% in our national forests out west, where the wildfires usually occur. Climate and those things go to that. But we throw a lot of money, we have a lot of solutions, but we've got to get better. The reality is we keep having these wildfires. I've been here 7 years, and we continue to have the same problems. We've got to do solutions at work, and with that, I yield my time to Mr. Lamalfa.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Chief Morris wanted to follow up on a couple of thoughts here. The authorities that were given in the 2018 Farm Bill, what was the most helpful out of those so far, do you think, to move the ball?
I think a number of them were. I think when I look at the G&A authorities, when I look at shared stewardship authorities, when I look at the collaborative forest landscape restoration opportunities there, I think they've all been very helpful, and I also think that they are pointing to a direction that's going to help us be more successful than we have in the past in terms of removing and improving a number of acres across, particularly across the West.
Yeah, I like, more local cooperation is pretty big, and if we're going to win this thing. Let me dwell on some of the firefighting aspects for a moment. I get report after report after report that when a fire breaks out, there might be somebody locally on site, maybe a logger, maybe somebody in construction, somebody like that might be nearby with a water truck, a dozer, a cat, personnel, whatever, and they might go out and be willing to go put out a fire when it's a quarter of an acre, and they might get run off by somebody aggressively saying, if you go out there, we will arrest you. Now, why would we chase people out that have forester ability, whether it's loggers or whoever, and they can put a circle around a fire until somebody gets there? Why the heavy-handed threats that I get anecdotal conversations about? Is that the official policy of the Forest Service, is to turn down good Samaritans that want to help on Forest Service land or neighboring responsibilities?
Congressman LaMalfa, I think what we're trying to do now is take a look at all opportunities going forward. If I focus on how we got to where we are, it's because we were afraid that anyone that was not red carded to handle wildfires would put themselves at unnecessary risk. And
Well, these aren't dumb people. These are already people out in the forest. They're constructors. They're forestry people. They can handle themselves if they know how to run a cat that's already out there.
I understand that, sir. What I'm saying is that what we're seeing in terms of fire behavior is not normal. And while an individual may feel like they are qualified to do this work, I'm not sure. So the question for me, and I think what we want to pursue, is what opportunities do we have to look at inviting people from in the community to be red carded and qualified to do the very work that you're talking about? So I'm open to looking at how we can pull people from the community in to do exactly what you're talking about.
But sir, you're talking like right now is that, we're looking at new opportunities. I've been doing this for 20 years at one level or another. You've been in the Forest Service for a long time. Why are we acting like this is new? These should be established protocols. We're having troubles with the Viper program, getting people with equipment ready to roll and such too, getting the contracts out because everybody's sitting in their offices. Why are we looking at this as a brand new thing? And I'll stop there for your answer.
Well, it's not a brand new thing, but it is something different because prior to now, they're not allowed to do that. We're trying to create an environment and the opportunity where we can look at how we might want to do that. And so what I'm saying is that I'm open to pursuing other opportunities, but we need to make sure that folks are qualified to be on these fires because the behavior is just unlike anything that we've seen. So I would not want to have people go out on these fires and something bad happens.
Thank you for your answer. The chair now recognizes Mr. Panetta for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate this opportunity. Chief Moore, always good to see you here in Washington in front of the Ag Committee, and I apologize for not being there in person. Obviously, you're hearing some themes here from the members of this subcommittee, and one of them is about staffing. Clearly, we believe that staffing is important to address what unfortunately has become the #1 cause of wildfires, and that's basically humans being humans, and not necessarily the most intelligent aspect of our human race, especially when it comes to how they deal with fire and basically the cause of many of the fires in our national forests. Obviously, you're aware of the bill that I introduced, the Save Our Forests Act, which will increase the amount of personnel there in our national forests. But I also was wondering if you could talk about other aspects of hiring, such as housing, such as fire stations, such as incentives in order to keep a well-qualified personnel there. Is that something that you take into account as well in looking at what you can do to not just hire but to retain Forest Service personnel?
Yeah, Congressman, first of all, I appreciate all your efforts in the past getting us to where we are now. In terms of some of the challenges, you're right. I think the Forest Service is a microcosm of what's happening in our country right now. And so there's competition for the labor workforce. When you look at the average salary for federal government employees, it's less than what some are making at that county or local level, and certainly at the state level in some locations. We're hopeful that we'll continue to try and meet our goals of 100% filled in terms of firefighters. We also know that one of the challenges is housing, particularly in some of our small communities, but also in some of our more popular areas where rent or the cost of a purchase of a home far exceeds our employees, particularly at that lower level of the organization's ability to afford housing. So we are trying to pursue opportunities for housing. We are looking forward to creating some of the kind of new opportunities with some of the locals to look at what are the possibilities there to build housing and to create that infrastructure so that we will have opportunities to fill firefighters and staff engines in some of our remote locations. But also, how do we fill those engines in some of those desirable locations where it's expensive to live and where the competition for the labor market is really high? So if we would invite the community to step forward, I'll give you an idea. You know, it's in everyone's best interest that we have a presence there. And so are there opportunities for some of our community leaders in some of these small rural communities to build housing and allow us to lease those facilities in order to have firefighters and employees live in these communities? And I think that this may be an opportunity for us to collaborate and sit down together with community leaders and others to help find solutions for some of the really tough problems that we have with infrastructure here in some of our locations.
Okay, Chief, I appreciate that and agree with you wholeheartedly and look forward to continuing to work with you. Let me pivot to another issue that Mr. O'Halloran brought up real quickly, and that's biofuels. Obviously, biofuels produced using feedstocks that are sourced from federal lands like national forests. Unfortunately, they're not qualifying for the EPA's renewable fuel standard, which, as you can tell, disincentivizes the private industry from contributing to wildfire risk reduction on our federal land. Can you give an update on whether or not the agency is working with the EPA on this issue? And can you elaborate in what little time we got on where you see the Forest Service and private industry working together to meet those goals?
Yes, let me ask Chris French, our Deputy Chief for NFS, to respond.
Yeah, so Congressman, thank you for the question. Absolutely, it is a concern. It's been an issue for quite a number of years. We are continuing our advocacy and conversations with the administration, with the EPA on the way that's defined and see it as a significant barrier in our ability to reduce wildland fuels.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate that. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes Ranking Member Thompson for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, thank you so much. First of all, Chief, just thank you for what you're talking about, identifying the firefighter need. As a former state certified firefighter, our rural communities are hurting with our mostly volunteer forces. And so I think you're partnering perhaps with USDA Rural Economic Development. Maybe we see what kind of creative things we could do. You know, a healthy community, to have a healthy community, you really need obviously qualified healthcare professionals in that community. To have a healthy forest, I think you need qualified silviculturists that are working with that forest. So my first quick question was, what is the status of vacancies? Or do we have all the qualified silviculturists in the system, or how many vacancies currently exist that we need to be filling for folks who are actually qualified as silviculturists?
Yeah, I don't have a number for the actual silviculture position. I have numbers generally across the agency, but Chris, as the National Forest Systems Deputy Chief, do we have information?
We do, and we can follow up with the specifics in general, Congressman.
Great.
What I would tell you is that we're running about 30 to 40% lower than the need, and that our attrition rate of folks retiring is is almost higher than what we're able to hire. Now, having said that, we are doing large collective hiring events across the entire nation to overcome that.
Okay. Well, I think we want to work with you on that, and if you got specific numbers based on region, that's always helpful, obviously. I mean, again, it comes back to the, community is not going to be healthy if they don't have access to a healthcare provider, and forests are not going to be healthy unless you have that expertise, and 30%, that's huge. So, Chief, how much timber do you expect to be harvesting in the coming year, and do you expect the harvest levels to increase, decrease, or remain stable in the next 5 years?
I expect them to increase, sir. What's happening now is that we're creating efficiencies. Give an example. When you look at the president's budget and what it was funded to do, it wasn't the same budget that we actually got. And so what we actually got was enough to produce 2.7 billion board feet. What the president budget proposed was about 3.2 billion board feet. Now, looking at the efficiencies that we have gained and looking so far at some of the bill funding that helps supplement that, we will exceed that. And our expectation is that we'll continue to exceed that going forward.
When you look at exceeding that, or we're talking about saw log, what's the breakdown between restorative cuts and saw log? Because that certainly has both impact the health of a forest, but we're always concerned about not just the health of the environment, but the health of the economy as well.
Yeah, in the past, we've considered saw logs as success, and that's what we had wanted. When I talked earlier about wood innovations and looking at new markets and new opportunities, I think no matter what we produce, whether it's the commercial saw logs, whether it's biomass, there's industry and there's a market for that material, and that's what we're shooting for. Rather than wasting anything, there's a market to utilize it to create jobs, particularly in our small rural communities, because we're finding that they're drying up because there's no jobs to keep them there. And I think being able to create markets in some of these small communities give us a really good chance of maintaining that infrastructure and just the texture of the communities that we have grown to love.
Yeah, I've met with, it's been a couple years now, but one of the things is we need to restore domestic furniture. I was proud to visit one of those this past week. It was very exciting what they're doing. Kind of a new startup that's doing great things. My staff tells me that the Forest Inventory Analysis Program shows that there's over 235 billion cubic feet of standing saw timber on unreserved national forest lands, over 200 billion of which is in the lower 48. That seems like it'd make you one of the largest holders of saw timber, if not the largest in the country. Can you explain how you have this much saw timber, and yet you mentioned having too much low value material?
Yeah, so I'm not sure where your numbers come from, but I'll tell you, normally when I hear large numbers like that, I know that it's all inclusive. It includes wilderness areas. It includes areas where we don't go in and remove.
And this specifically was sourced as the on reserve, so took that into account.
Yeah, there's no doubt we have a lot of opportunities and a large need to remove a lot of vegetation off the landscapes out there. So there's no way around that, sir. We have a lot of vegetation removal that we need to do, particularly if we're going to be looking at trying to reduce the unwanted fires that's happening across the landscapes, primarily in the west, but throughout as well. The other issue we have, too, if you look at the south and you look at the east and some of those areas, while it may not be fire that destroys a lot of those landscapes, it's hurricane and it's other storm damage that we have to be considerate of.
Yeah, the Allegheny, it's invasive species.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
It's that wonderful black cherry there.
That's right. Thanks, Chief.
The chair now recognizes Ms. Schreier for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome back, Chief Moore. It's great to see you again. I first just want to re-extend my invitation to you to visit my district this summer. It is beautiful in Washington State in the summer, to speak with stakeholders about priority forest restoration and wildfire mitigation projects. My district actually includes much of the land covered by the Central Washington Initiative. In fact, it's one of the 10 landscapes selected for an initial investment to implement the Forest Service's 10-year wildfire crisis strategy. Next, I'd like to note that the Farm Bill programs which authorize trusted Forest Service partners to conduct management projects on federal land are of great importance to Washington State. For example, Good Neighbor Authority allows the Washington State Department of Natural Resources to hire and collaborate with local companies to perform a variety of important watershed, rangeland, and forest restoration work. The 638 Authority is another great example. With this authority, the Yakima Nation is conducting a much-needed salmon habitat and stream restoration project on Nason Creek in central Washington. So through 638, the Yakima Nation brought their own funding and expertise to this initiative, allowing the work to move forward quickly and efficiently. And with the additional funding from the bipartisan infrastructure law, they are expecting to rely on continued use of the 638 Authority for more projects in the near future. The last thing I'd like to focus on for my question is watersheds. As you know, forests provide drinking water to more than 150 million people in the United States. The Forest Service's Watershed Condition Framework, which was authorized in the Forestry title of the 2018 Farm Bill, authorizes the Forest Service to evaluate watershed conditions and develop, implement, and monitor restoration action plans in coordination with other interested parties. In the Pacific Northwest, forest stakeholders are telling me that much of the watershed restoration needs are related to roads, and that the Legacy Roads and Trails program is the principal source of funding. I was really proud to have my bill to codify Legacy Roads and Trails included in the bipartisan infrastructure law, along with a $250 million appropriation. So my questions for you, Chief Moore, first of all, I know that the service recently completed an update of the Watershed Condition Framework. Can you share a little bit about the findings for the Mount Baker Snoqualmie and the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forests in Washington State?
Yes, I sure can. And first of all, thank you for the question. And I look forward to coming to Washington State again to visit with you and some of your constituents there. Based on the condition assessment, 93% of the 128 watersheds on the Mount Baker Snoqualmie are functioning properly. And this is good news. The remaining 7% are functioning at risk. When I look at the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest, in contrast, 41% of the 210 watersheds are functioning properly, and 58% are functioning at risk, and you have 1% that are impaired in terms of how it functions. So that's what the framework assessment is telling us about those two forests currently.
Sounds like we have work to do, particularly in the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest. Can you share your perspective on funding needs for the watershed restoration action plans in the Pacific Northwest, including Legacy Roads and Trails? Do we have enough appropriated now? What do we need in order to get those numbers much farther up?
Yeah, and I may ask for help here, but the total functioning needs to complete the work specified in that watershed restoration action plan, and these plans are associated with 67 priority watersheds in the Pacific Northwest region, which is Washington and Oregon. So that total is about $55 million, and about $32 million could be funded via the Legacy Roads and Trails program, thanks to you. And one other piece that I would add is since 2011, the National Forests in the Pacific Southwest have completed all needed restoration work on 37 of those 67 priority watersheds. And so while there's still work to be done, there has been a lot of work that have already been done and completed. And so kudos to the Pacific Northwest region for their focus on looking at improving those critical priority watersheds in that part of the country.
Thank you. That's a lot of money that you talked about. It sounds like almost a fifth of what has been appropriated for Legacy Roads and Trails. Do you have any sense of the timeline for rolling out those funds so that we can continue to make progress?
Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. We are about ready to announce within a few weeks here over 120 legacy roads and trails projects across the country, I think in 38 states. And as you pointed out, if you look at the costs associated with just those in the Pacific Northwest, if you look at the funding that we got in bill, which was $200 million over five years, the true needs across the country far exceed that. And so we're prioritizing those most impaired watersheds, including those up in the Pacific Northwest, in this first set of projects we're rolling out.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Ms. Miller for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Spanberger. I'd like to yield my time to Chairman LaMalfa.
You increased my rank. Thank you, though. Appreciate that. Chief Moore, thank you again. I want to follow up a little bit more on the readiness for this fire season, as we're already in the middle of it. You know, last couple of years we've had some ups and downs with the Viper program, which is the program that allows the Forest Service to contract with private owners of equipment that are helpful in fire situations. What is the status of the Viper program this year? What's the feedback you're getting from these equipment owners that would like to be helpful with their water trucks and their dozers and et cetera? How's that looking this year?
So I'm not hearing a lot of problems with Viper, Congressman. As you know, we had attended a meeting with you and some of your constituents there a couple of years back.
Appreciate that. Yes, sir.
And those same problems existed, but I believe we found a workable solution under the emergency use authorization to get around the problems that we had, particularly in Northern California. And so unless you can share with me what some particular concerns or issues we have with Viper, I think we have worked through those issues that we had in the past. But I'm open for an opportunity to improve that if necessary.
Okay, I appreciate that. We'll follow up on that if we're getting feedback differently than that. You mentioned wilderness areas a minute ago. What is the standard for Forest Service on maintaining wilderness areas for fire safety, for healthy forests, for the number of trees per acre that we talked about earlier is healthy, and the ability to put out fires in those areas? What is the standard, or what should the standard be for access to those and the maintenance of them so that they are healthy forests and fire safe?
So as you know, we're not allowed to cut timber in wilderness areas. One of the, and if I could just focus on California since that's where you are, when I look at wildfires, all it takes really to use equipment in those areas is for that local line officer, the forest supervisor in this case, to request from the regional forester the authority and the okay to use mechanized equipment
on wilderness?
On wilderness, yes. And during my time there in California, it was a process, and part of it is because right outside of wilderness areas we have communities. And if we didn't suppress that fire within wilderness, that community was at risk. And so I have always been okay with using mechanized equipment in wilderness for that reason. Because when you look at California itself, it said about 93% of California is in urban settings. And when you have that number of urban settings across a state, it's very dangerous to not manage a fire regardless of where it's at.
93% of
urban settings. You know, like in your district, you have a lot of communities that are built up. It's not necessarily a city, but you have communities that are built. That's in urban settings. And when you look at across the state, it's not equal all over the state, but when you look at the average across the states, it's estimated that about 93% of California's.
That's interesting criteria. So let's say that take the town of Westwood, for example, which was threatened by fire last year, and Dixie as well. It has a perimeter. So what makes, when you're talking a landscape of 93% is considered urban, what is the radius away from these towns that you would count as part of being urban, I guess? Because, I drive my district a lot, and there's a lot of gaps in between that isn't urban, even small towns. Thank you, Ms. Miller. Thank you.
Yeah, well, as you know, Northern California is different than Central, and it's different than Southern. And so we're looking at the average. But, in terms of urban communities being threatened, it depends on a lot of conditions, wind, topography.
No, what I was asking, though, was for the landscape to be considered 93% urban interface, right? That means a town that's a square mile in the middle of a forest that might not have another town for 30 miles. How many acres around that town are what you're considering the acreage that makes 93%? How many, is it a 1 mile buffer around town that you would consider the urban area? I don't follow you.
Well, I don't have that level of detail, but it don't have to be a little town, Congressman. It could be a little group of homes. It could be just a setting where you have communities. We have a lot of resorts also isolated in remote areas.
Okay, well, that's interesting that much would be considered urban. On wilderness areas then, so you feel like you have the access at a simple phone call to send equipment out there if a fire starts and it will start immediately?
Yeah, my experience has been that usually has happened really quick. It has not been an issue in California, sir.
Don't have to wait days. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LaMalfa. The chair now recognizes Mr. Moore for 5 minutes.
Chief Moore, thank you for being here. And as you know, the goal of forest conservation is to promote and conserve the rich diversity of natural resources found in healthy forests. This goal can be achieved by protecting and improving forests, providing technical assistance, and facilitating conservation efforts. In my district, we have about 4.4 million acres of forest. What programs authorize, and I'm fairly new to the farm process, I'm a freshman, so I was just curious, what programs were authorized in the 2018 Farm Bill that you have found to be the most utilized and least utilized?
So the most utilized program in the Farm Bill is going to be the landscape restoration program. An example of the effectiveness of this program is that the changes expanded eligible applicants beyond the states to include tribes, nonprofits, and institutions of higher learning. And they also prioritize investments on rural landscapes. So, it's those projects that contribute to healthy, climate-resistant rural forests and communities. So in short, it expanded the eligibility for people to participate in that, where it used to be with just states. Now it includes states, tribes, nonprofits, and institutions of higher learning.
What was the least used, Chief? What did you find to be the least effective program or least utilized?
Well, that's hard to say because where one program may be least utilized in one part of the country, it could be heavily utilized in another part of the country. And so that question would be hard for me to answer that unless you say, well, what's the least utilized program there in your district there in Alabama? And then I could be more responsive to that in terms of what's actually being used there versus the one that's most effectively used there.
So, and I guess based on that, we kind of gauge effectiveness based on utilization. And are there any programs that are just really popular in the southeastern part of the U.S. that you think that are just my constituents would appreciate and that we would need to fight for in 2018? Or in the 2020 Farm Bill, I should say.
What was the question?
Are there sections that were popular in the Southeast that we should go forward with?
Well, I think the GNA with the Good Neighbor Authority, an agreement that we've talked about is very popular. I think the shared stewardship agreements are another one that's very, very popular. And I think what makes them so popular is that it gives us the opportunity to bring the community into the decision space of not only how we do it, but what we do. And that's one of the things that I think with some of these new authorities and how it has changed how the agency operates from the past. It gives a voice and decision space to the community in a much bigger way than perhaps what we've had in the past.
Thank you, Chief. And with that, Madam Chair, I'll yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the very patient Mr. Costa for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson, for holding this important hearing with the subcommittee. Obviously, when we see, as was noted by our colleague, Congressman LaMalfa, we no longer have a fire season, but it's a fire year. and we're dealing with that throughout the country, in the West, particularly in California. The last time I participated in subcommittee hearing was in the fall of 2020, toward the end of the Creek Fire. Matter of fact, I did a little bit of research here. Of the 20 largest fires in California dating back to 1932, 14 of them have been in the last 10 years. And climate change and many factors has been noted is the cause that we're dealing with. When I participated 2 years ago, I asked then Deputy Chief Phipps about what would be needed to do proper forest management to catch up. As you said, Chief, we're playing catch up. And he indicated at that time, so almost 2 years ago, $2 to $3 billion a year for 10 years. Now, you've got your current budget that we've got, and then there was the bipartisan infrastructure package that I believe gave another $3.2 billion. But you add those numbers up, and they don't come close to $2 to $3 billion a year for the next 10 years. As you put your 10-year plan together, how are you prioritizing that, and also hopefully in allowing for additional partnership and funding in state and local monies? In California, I know we've done a fair amount.
So we've looked at, Congressman, 10 landscapes across primarily the West, and that covers about 8 different states. And so if I was to just focus on California, we do have a landscapes there in California we want to focus on. And what's good about California is that the state has been really aggressive and progressive in terms of treating, the landscape conditions there in the state. And so the Forest Service there is partnering with them, and they have a goal to treat 1 million acres per year between the state.
And then you get to there, and Lamothe and I both are at the same point, I think, and that is the funding. Do we have the funding to meet those goals between federal and state resources? Because what I've observed here in recent years is that we end up augmenting the fire suppression funding because we take some of that from the forest management, and we're always playing catch up, and we're never, we've done a poor job, let's acknowledge it, for 20 years in managing our forests, and we're paying the price for that, I think.
Yeah, so if you look at the $5.6 billion or the $3 billion that we have for hazard fuel reduction, it's only a shot in the arm in terms of what we actually need to make a difference in the landscape.
Well, I think it would be helpful if you would provide the subcommittee here with what you would really need to do the job for your 10-year program. On the private sector, I was up visiting part of the Creek Fire in the last week or two, and the devastation that's there. Some of the private landowners indicated that they've taken advantage of NCRS funding to help do this. You have not mentioned that. What's the potential for getting more private landowners involved to help do their part?
Yep, Jayla.
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. Yes, we work with our sister agency, NRCS. They do provide funding for post-fire rehabilitation to private landowners, and there's a pretty substantial budget there for that.
But we could do more of it, right?
Yes, we can do more of it.
We've got to figure out how we include that. On the use of the wood products, and excuse me, I got a lot of questions and a little time. The fact is that it seems to me the salvage operations, again using the Creek Fire because I was just there twice in the last 10 days, we're trying to make progress in getting that salvage timber out, trying to find places where log decking or whatever you call it. But again, we're playing catch up, right, Chief?
Right. We are playing catch up, Congressman.
And that's just one of the 14 fires in the last 10 years that you've had to do that forest management just in California. That doesn't take in the other 8 states, right?
That's correct.
And of course, we're losing water. We lost over 700,000 acre-feet of water in drought conditions. Let me close on the permitting process because I think it's an important area, and I think it's a problem. When the Native Americans managed Yosemite floor, the valley floor, they seemed to do a better job than we did. They'd go in the springtime and live there, and then in the fall when first snow, they'd come out and they'd set fires. I understand we got more trees on the valley floor now than ever, and we can't get the permits to properly manage one of the nation's great national parks.
Yeah, that's probably a question for the National Park Service to.
But the permitting impacts you as well,
It
for other forest areas.
It does, yes.
Is it a problem?
Well, of course, it creates unnecessary problems for us.
Recommend how we adjust that, and my time has expired, but there are a number of areas here that I'll submit further questions working with my colleagues, not only in California, but with the good work of this subcommittee chair and the efforts, and thank you for allowing me to participate.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. Having concluded all questions for our first panel, the witnesses are now excused. Chief Moore, Mr. French, Ms. Hall Rivera, the committee thanks you for your testimony today. The committee will now take a brief recess for our first panel of witnesses to depart and our second panel of witnesses to take their seats. We would typically do a full 5 minutes, but given that we are coming up on votes, I'm going to take a brief recess as long as it takes for our second panel to get comfortably situated. Thank you so very much.
No, I'd like to, but I can't. Okay. Thank you.
Hello, Chief. And I'm Dan. I'm with the Nature Consulting. Oh, nice to meet you. Yeah. Now we get started. We'll get a quick picture. Oh, great partner.
We just visited her. Ann used to be, Arteska used to be with the as well. We were just talking about the past.
Where was that?
She was here.
That's great.
Why don't we see what's...
Great, thank you.
second panel of witnesses to the Agriculture Committee today. On the second panel, our first witness is Ms. Reed Height, President and CEO of the American Forest Foundation. Our second witness is Mr. Douglas Reed, President of Green Diamond Resources, testifying on behalf of the National Alliance of Forest Owners. Our third witness is Mr. Christopher Martin, the Connecticut State Forester, and testifying in his capacity as the President of the National Association of State Foresters. Our fourth witness today is Ms. Rebecca Humphreys, the CEO of National Wild Turkey Federation. Our fifth witness is Ms. Sally Palmer, the Central Appalachian External Affairs Advisor for the Nature Conservancy. And our final witness is Mr. Tom Schultz, the Vice President of the Idaho Forest Group, testifying in his capacity as President of the Federal Forest Resource Coalition. You will each have 5 minutes to deliver your testimony. The timer should be visible on your screen and will count down to 0, at which point in time your time has expired. Ms. Height, please begin when you are ready.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to share the views of the American Forest Foundation and the family forest owners we work with across the country every day. It's good to be back here, albeit on the other side of the dais. I had the privilege of staffing this committee on forestry issues a few years ago, so good to see some familiar faces. Well, there's more in my testimony.
Ms. Height, if I could interrupt you, there's an audio issue for those who are joining us virtually. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. All right. Ms. Height, you may proceed. Thank you so much.
Sure. While there's more in my testimony about the improvements we suggest in the Farm Bill, I'd like to focus this morning on the significant opportunity we see to unlock private sector support for family forests and the economic and environmental benefits that these lands provide. First, I just want to hit a little bit around family forest owners, who they are and such. Most people, when they think about forests in this country, they think about the government and they think about corporations. Most don't know that the majority of the largest chunk of our forests are owned by families and individuals. 1 in 4 rural Americans own forests. And in fact, many of these forests are associated with a farm operation. About 75 million acres of our family forests are part of a farm operation. Forests are critical in our rural economies. Family forests supply more than half of the wood supply for the nation's forest products manufacturing in the U.S., and they also provide us with clean air, climate mitigation, and a host of other benefits as well. Family forest owners come from all backgrounds, but they all want to care for their land and have an impact on the planet. They're people like Kedron Dillard, a third-generation African-American forest owner who shares ownership with a dozen relatives, but is struggling to find a way for the farm to pay for itself. There are people like Sutter and Taylor Rogers in California who operate an outdoor summer camp for kids, but who can't afford to tackle the overgrown fire-prone stands at their camp. There are people like the Boutwells in Alabama who manage sustainably for timber, and they look for voluntary options and markets to keep their forests economically viable. Family forest owners want to care for their land, but need technical and financial help to do that. And we're not just talking about these 4 landowners. There's 21 million people in America that own forests. Consider this: 85% of forest owners are not working with a forester and don't have a management plan, and thus not maximizing the full potential of their forests. To be clear, the Farm Bill has helped. This committee has done a great job in the last few Farm Bills of really opening opportunities in those conservation programs for forest owners. But still, we're just scratching the surface. These lands are not yet living up to their full potential, and we're seeing big challenges on the horizon, from climate change to wildfires. We've talked about that already this morning. These are challenges that require active forest stewardship, and they're challenges that require technical and financial help for family landowners, and they're challenges where family forest owners can be a big part of the solution. While increased conservation program dollars are critical and improvements in those programs are critical, there is an opportunity to leverage the rapidly growing market, voluntary carbon market, which we estimate to be worth about $90 billion in the coming decades, to actually support the same kind of forest stewardship we're doing with those conservation programs and help those programs be leveraged further. To be clear, the government's role in carbon markets should be minimal. The private sector is driving this, AFF is working alongside the Nature Conservancy on a program called the Family Forest Carbon Program to help unlock these markets for family landowners. What the Farm Bill can do and what USDA can do is the same role that USDA has played for a lot of other agriculture markets. Catalyze these markets, open up these opportunities for forest owners so we can bring these resources to rural communities. Very similar to the Sustains Act that Congressman Thompson has introduced. We see a significant opportunity for rural America to benefit from these markets in ways that leverage and support those Farm Bill programs. The private sector is eager to invest in these opportunities, but because they're new and because they require upfront investment, we need tools like what is suggested in the Rural Forest Markets Act that a number of the committee members here have co-sponsored. If we can't overcome these financing hurdles, this market opportunity will pass rural America, and we'll see investments in other technologies, and America's rural family landowners will not benefit. So Chairwoman, Ranking Member, appreciate the time. I see a lot of opportunity to help the Farm Bill's forestry investments go further by leveraging these market opportunities as well as improvements in the program.
Thank you for being absolutely right on time with your testimony. Votes have been called, so we are going to recess while members of the committee. There's official language. There have been 2 votes called on the House floor. The committee will take a brief recess and we will reconvene shortly. We appreciate your patience. Thank you. We will now resume the subcommittee hearing. Mr. Reed, please begin when you are ready. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Spanberger, Ranking Member LaMalfa, distinguished members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. My name is Douglas Reed. I am the president of Green Diamond Resource Company, a fifth-generation family-owned forestry company started by my great-great-grandfather in 1890. Today, our company owns and operates working forests in the West and South. Green Diamond's long-term commitment to forest stewardship is at the heart of our business. I'm here today in my role as chairman of the board of NAFO, the National Alliance of Forest Owners. NAFO represents privately owned working forests like ours. These forests provide clean air and water, wildlife habitat, and jobs. Of course, they also provide a steady, sustainable supply of products for building homes and schools and thousands of other everyday items. Our businesses also support 2.5 million American jobs, mainly in rural communities. Working forests are also a critical natural climate solution, yet there's room to do more, and we've laid a path to get there as a sector. Recently, I joined 42 of my fellow forestry CEOs and our counterparts at the Environmental Defense Fund and the Nature Conservancy to adopt a climate roadmap for private working forests. We are carrying these ideas to Farm Bill stakeholder groups. Working forests sequester and store carbon. At just under half the nation's forest land base, private working forests provide 90% of domestic timber harvests, 80% of our nation's annual net carbon sequestration, and nearly half of our long-term forest carbon storage. To put this in context, privately owned working forests alone sequester more carbon than is emitted annually by 100 million passenger vehicles. Sustainably sourced forest products are also a climate solution. Half the dry weight of wood is carbon taken out of the air. When we substitute wood for other carbon-intensive building materials, we can reduce the carbon footprint of our buildings. The Farm Bill can help us reach a greener, more resilient future. We are interested in 3 work streams. First, the Forest Inventory and Analysis Program. Second, programs to support building with wood. And third, addressing the wildfire crisis. First, FIA. USDA's Forest Inventory and Analysis Program provides vital information on our nation's forest resources. At Green Diamond, we have developed carbon offset projects, and we have efforts underway in 4 states. Key to this type of work is reliable data to ensure that these projects are rooted in facts and science. As interest in forest as a climate solution grows, more and more stakeholders rely on FIA data to make decisions, sometimes in new ways. Despite attention in the 2018 Farm Bill and increases in funding since then, the program needs additional support to meet all these growing uses. I recommend Congress direct the Forest Service to establish a national 5-year measurement cycle, standardize protocols for data collection and analysis, and ensure FIA has the strategic direction it needs to grow and adapt. These changes should be additive to the good work FIA is already doing. Second, building with wood. Wood is climate friendly, safe, durable, and can be grown locally, which supports American jobs. With new technology, we can use wood in new ways. I'd like to thank you for the successful Timber Innovation Act in the 2018 Farm Bill. There are now over 1,300 mass timber buildings in the US, a big jump from 2018. Yet we still lag far behind Europe on the use of mass timber, despite our abundant, sustainably managed forests. The 2023 Farm Bill should build on the Timber Innovation Act. NAFO, together with partners such as the American Wood Council, looks forward to working with you on this effort. Third, severe wildfire. Almost exactly a year ago, the bootleg fire started on federal ground and devastated 413,000 acres in Southern Oregon, including 110,000 acres of Green Diamond property. Chief Moore's testimony this morning is right that more fires start on private lands where people live and work. But while just 20 to 30% of fires begin on federal lands, 70 to 80% of acres burned are on federal land. What we know is that all stakeholders need to work together, and that active forest management is a proven tool to improve forest health and resilience. Yet worsening fire seasons are making stewardship objectives harder to achieve. Congress should encourage the Forest Service to use all available resources to fight fires as vigorously as possible. The Forest Service and private forest owners in the West are partnering to fight fire across land ownership. This innovative partnership will give field officers and incident commanders more tools, more local knowledge and experience to keep fires manageable and less dangerous. We'd like to thank Chief Moore for his leadership on these issues. And thank you again for having this hearing and allowing us to participate. We stand ready to provide any resources the committee would like.
Thank you for your testimony. The chair now recognizes Mr. Martin. Please begin when you are ready. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Spanberger and Ranking Member Lamafalfa, the members of the subcommittee for holding this hearing today and for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the National Association of State Foresters. I am Christopher Martin, Connecticut State Forester and NASF President. NASF represents the directors of forestry agencies in all 50 states, 5 U.S. territories, 3 nations in compacts of free association with the U.S., and the District of Columbia. State foresters deliver technical and financial assistance to private landowners for the conservation of more than 2/3 of the nation's forests. They also partner with federal land management agencies through cooperative agreements and Good Neighbor Authority to manage national forests and grasslands. We are the principal conduit for connecting federal programs and private landowners, working with cooperative extension services, certified foresters, conservation districts, and local communities to administer, implement, and deliver the state and private forestry programs authorized under the Cooperative Forestry Assistance Act, as well as other federal programs and authorities. We appreciate this subcommittee's holding this important hearing today to review the forestry provisions from the 2018 Farm Bill as we work toward developing the next Farm Bill. I'd like to highlight for you today 3 policy priorities for NASF we've identified for addressing the next Farm Bill. First, the Good Neighbor Authority has allowed the Forest Service to partner with states on federal forest restoration and management projects, facilitating critical work to improve species habitat, enhance watersheds, and reduce hazardous fuels and mitigate wildfire risks. In the 2018 Farm Bill, Congress expanded GNA to make tribes and counties eligible entities to enter into Good Neighbor agreements. However, tribes and counties are not afforded the same authority as states to retain GNA project revenue to reinvest in conservation, greatly reducing the significant incentive to engage and partner on critical management projects, including wildfire mitigation, invasive species management, and habitat maintenance. Additionally, the 2018 Farm Bill removed the ability for restoration services that were agreed to under the Good Neighbor agreements to take place off federal lands. This means adjacent state, tribal, county, and other land that is essential to the health and productivity of national forests can no longer be restored as a comprehensive landscape with revenues generated from GNA projects. NASF supports authorizing counties and tribes to retain and expend GNA revenues generated from GNA projects and restoring the cost boundary nature of GNA by removing the requirement that revenue from GNA projects must be spent solely on federal lands. Additionally, NASF supports further expanding GNA to all federal land management agencies, making the authority permanent, or at a minimum extending the 2013 sunset date for states to retain GNA revenue, and amending the GNA to authorize the reconstruction, repair, and restoration of roads administered by the Bureau of Land Management and other federal agencies. Second priority from the 2018 Farm Bill codified a landscape restoration program, but also stipulated a new rural requirement for LSR, resulting in a subsequent rulemaking by the Forest Service limiting LSR work to communities of less than 50,000 people. This significantly reduced the scope and efficacy of the program, eliminating many opportunities for the urban and community forestry program work, and reduced the potential for hazardous fuels reduction projects under LSR within the wildland-urban interface. NASF supports modifying the language in Section 8102 of the 2018 Farm Bill that designated the program as strictly as a rural program. To be as impactful as possible across all ownerships and all landscape scale, all lands, including cities, suburbs, and towns, should be eligible for LSR support, as they were prior to in the 2018 Farm Bill. The program should not exclude larger communities or populations that depend on trees for their health, well-being, and particularly in historically underserved communities. Urban and community forestry projects under LSR are crucial to ensuring all people have equitable access to the many benefits of trees. Section 8401 of the 2018 Farm Bill provided a new authority for the Forest Service to make grants available to state foresters for hazardous fuel reduction projects that cross land ownership boundaries. While this new authority is working well and increasing the authorization for appropriations is warranted, it is our understanding the Forest Service used this authority to codify an existing mechanism for implementing cross-boundary hazardous fuel projects, commonly known as Stevens money. An appropriations provision championed by the late Senator Ted Stevens. Our written testimony provides more background on history and purpose of this funding. The intent of the Forest and the Farm Bill Coalition for Section 8401 and 2018 Farm Bill was to supplement existing mechanisms for implementing cross-boundary hazardous fuel projects and augmenting funding available for accomplishing this work, not to supplant Stevens money. We look forward to working with the members of the subcommittee and our partners in the Forestry and Farm Bill Coalition here with us today and developing a solution that will best utilize all available authorities and funding accomplishing this important work. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes Ms. Humphries. Please begin when you're ready. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairperson Spanberger, Ranking Member LaMaffa, and members of this subcommittee. It is my pleasure to be with you here today and an honor to talk about Farm Bill. I'm Becky Humphries. I'm co-CEO of the National Wild Turkey Federation. That co-title denotes the fact that I will be moving towards retirement next year, and the new leadership of NWTF will be moving into their roles. 2023 will also be our 50th anniversary year, and we're very proud of the great work we've done at the National Wild Turkey Federation to not only conserve the wild turkey and also preserve our hunting heritage, but tremendous conservation work. Since 1985, we have conserved over 20 million acres of habitat. Today, I'd like to just focus on a couple of our partnerships and what we see as additional opportunities for refinement in the next Farm Bill. The first, I'd like to highlight, we've had a 40-year partnership with the U.S. Forest Service. This partnership was built with us making tracks, as we call it. But it's about active management and helping the Forest Service do active management through stewardship contracting and beyond. We have done the first stewardship contract and over 100 of them since, all across this nation. To put it in perspective, since in 2019, we were number 4 nationally of federal commercial timber purchasers of timber volume sold off the National Forest System. Huge. We're usually one of the top 10. And we don't have a mill, we don't make furniture, it's all stewardship. It goes right back into the forest to make those forests more sustainable, to be better managed, and to make sure we have clean water and native species. 2 things that we would like to see. Number 1 is we'd like to extend stewardship authority to all federal lands. As we talked about earlier in this hearing, not all fires start on federal lands, but federal lands, national parks, refuges, and Army Corps of Engineer lands would open up an additional 180 million acres of land to potential stewardship work, and they're badly needed. Secondly, we'd like to see 20-year stewardship contracts on the national scale. We desperately need stability in our rural communities and for private investment for future forest management work. And 20-year agreements would put more of our work in long-term perspective rather than redoing agreements that, quite frankly, the administrative overhead takes up time and energy. The other partnership I'd like to highlight is our National Forestry Initiative. This is a partnership that we have with USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. Through this partnership, we have positions in 24 states to do technical assistance for on-the-ground private forest owners. It's paramount to getting good forest management on the ground. And as my colleague Rita Height mentioned earlier, we have just a small portion of those forest owners that are seeking that technical assistance. We need to do more. And in this next Farm Bill, we'd like to see prescribed fire highlighted as a tool. Many times it is the most cost-effective means of doing active management and ongoing management on the forest, but it takes technical assistance and it takes equipment. The third thing I'd like to highlight is a concern, and it goes beyond Farm Bill, but quite frankly, we've tried to address it within large categorical exclusions in past Farm Bills. We're seeing significant pushback in terms of legal challenges when we are trying to go through forest management plans. And what's happening is this expansion of legal challenges is requiring us to go back into forest management plans and update those with every new occurrence of threatened endangered species. That work should really be done at the project level. That is the area, the time when you're doing the actual planning and the historical review, as well as threatened endangered species. And so we'd like to see approved forest plans not be ongoing federal actions, but rather have that review at a lower level. We look forward to working together with the subcommittee in the days ahead to move forward on our next Farm Bill. Many great strides have been made, and with some refinement, we can make them even better in the days ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And Ms. Palmer, the chair now recognizes you for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairwoman Spanberger, Ranking Member LaMalfa, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to submit testimony on forests in the Farm Bill. My name is Sally Rollins Palmer, and I'm here representing the Nature Conservancy. For over 70 years, we have worked to protect ecologically important lands and waters for people and nature here in the United States and around the world. It is a privilege to follow Chief Randy Moore of the Forest Service and be joined by leaders in forestry with whom we partner in the Forest and Farm Bill Coalition. I am a native of the Appalachian foothills in Tennessee. Growing up in this beautiful region gave me an appreciation for nature and all the different peoples who have stewarded these places as their home for centuries. Professionally, I've worked for the TNC for over 2 decades, first as a field ecologist and in later years on natural resource policy efforts. I currently serve as the External Affairs Advisor for our Central Appalachians program. I have experience working with state and federal agency partners to implement many programs authorized by the Farm Bill. While my testimony today will draw on those experiences, our written testimony represents our broad interests and the work of my colleagues on forests in the U.S. and globally. The need for more collaboration and financial investment to halt biodiversity loss and address climate change has never been greater. The Farm Bill is a critical part of the solution by providing the authorities and funding to ensure improved stewardship on private working forests, address ecologically sound forest management needs in our public forests, and combat challenges including climate change, insects and diseases, drought, and catastrophic wildfires. I would like to share with you examples of how Farm Bill programs are helping improve our forests for the future in the Appalachians, emphasizing the importance of collaboration and planning at the local and landscape scales. This work is driven by my colleagues in the field, along with partners at the federal, state, and local levels. For example, the Forest Legacy Program is investing in some of the most biodiverse and climate-resilient forests in North America, including a recent example in Georgia. Located in the southern end of the Appalachians, the dug-down corridor spans 100,000 acres and 50 miles between the Talladega National Forest in Alabama and the Sheffield-Paulding Wildlife Management Areas. The state of Georgia and many partners have a goal to conserve and restore forests and increase the amount of publicly accessible recreation land in northwest Georgia. The Nature Conservancy also has a long history of partnering with the Forest Service, working to implement the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program. In the southern region in Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, TNC and partners have successfully implemented the Grandfather Restoration Initiative, a long-term effort that has increased prescribed burning and other management practices to more than 40,000 acres. We also collaborate extensively with the Forest Service to implement prescribed fire programs across many fire-adapted forest systems in the Appalachians and in the longleaf pine ecosystem, improving forest health, and reducing the risk of wildfires. In Maryland and West Virginia, TNC has partnered with State Forestry and the Monongahela National Forest on the Landscape Scale Restoration Program. This project involved 10 counties and invested in the science needed to establish shared restoration goals. It funded cost-effective approaches to deploying prescribed fire crews in the field and tested approaches to controlling invasive species on public and private forest lands. In addition, statewide forest resource assessments and strategies are vitally important for greater collaboration between federal, state, and other entities. These plans also enable the type of watershed-scale prioritization and management implementation that is becoming even more important given the drought and extreme rainfall swings our forests are now facing. The Joint Chiefs Program also is a significant vehicle for delivering both forest and freshwater restoration efforts in the Appalachian region. TNC is currently a main collaborator on Joint Chiefs projects in Virginia and Tennessee. To support region-wide management needs, I also note that growing markets for low-value forest products is important in Appalachia. TNC generally supports ecologically sound management for forest products and advocates for such strategies to be designed to restore forests to a more ecologically sound condition. In conclusion, I emphasize TNC's guiding objectives for investing in forests within the Farm Bill provided in our written testimony. We also hope the next Farm Bill can provide maximum flexibility and access to forest programs, particularly those funded by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Some have high match requirements that create barriers for financially strapped partners and local communities. We are grateful to this committee for its longstanding commitment to address the needs of America's forests and to help Congress advance a global zero deforestation policy agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Palmer. Mr. Schultz, please begin when you are ready. You have 5 minutes. Mr. Schultz, you are muted.
Thanks. Chairwoman Spanberger, Ranking Member LaMalfa, and members of the committee. I am Tom Schultz, and I'm here today in my capacity as president of the Federal Forest Resource Coalition, a national nonprofit representing purchasers of Forest Service timber in 37 states. Our members employ over 390,000 people and provide payroll in excess of $24 billion annually. The most significant forest management reforms adopted in the last decade have been enacted through the 2014 and 2018 Farm Bills. I'm here today to share my experiences with these programs and suggest improvements to address the forest health crisis afflicting our national forests. Among other things, the 2014 and 2018 Farm Bills expanded Good Neighbor Authority, made stewardship contracting permanent, created streamlined authorities for forest health and fuels reduction projects on national forests. I want to focus on these authorities with recommendations on how to improve them. First is Good Neighbor Authority, or GNA. It has become a crucial tool to improve forest health in the national forests. Since 2014, Farm Bill expanded it to all 50 states. The number of acres treated annually under this program has grown by more than 20-fold and is now averaging more than 60,000 acres per year. In Idaho alone, we've treated more than 8,200 acres of Forest Service lands using GNA authorities. The program is a true state, federal, local partnership, with the Forest Service and the NRCS working seamlessly with private landowners, state foresters, industry, and others to implement projects ranging from forest thinning to commercial timber sales to the creation of fuel and fire breaks. By leveraging the capacity of state forestry agencies, GNA allows us to practice what we call in Idaho, no boundaries forestry. As of 2021, 20 timber sales have been awarded under the GNA program in Idaho, treating the 8,200 acres I mentioned, and generating over 70 million board feet of timber. Additionally, over 60 restoration service contracts at a total value of $3.5 million have been awarded to the private sector. The Idaho GNA program is a true success story, having nearly quadrupled volume outputs in just 5 short years since it began. It is now roughly 10% of the annual timber program sold from partnering national forests. The 2023 Farm Bill is an opportunity to make several key reforms, including allowing states, counties, and tribes to use revenue generated by the GNA projects on non-federal lands and to allow revenue from existing projects to be used for this work as well. By allowing new road construction under GNA, this program could retire older, poorly placed roads and replace them with better engineered roads to help reduce water quality impacts. Making Good Neighbor Authority permanent with these reforms will provide a powerful incentive to partners to continue investing in the program. The 2014 Farm Bill also made Stewardship Contracting Authority permanent. Stewardship Contracting has been a vital authority allowing the Forest Service to implement forest restoration and management projects. Now accounts for about 25% of the overall Forest Service timber sale volume. In some regions, that has grown to exceed 50%. One thing we've learned is that the loss of forest products facilities makes forest management far more difficult and expensive. The Forest Service has struggled mightily for decades to attract new forest industries to Arizona, where millions of acres of fire-adapted pine forest urgently need thinning. Further loss of milling infrastructure could put up to 35 million additional acres of national forest at risk of the same fate. We urge you to amend authority to make retention of existing forest products facilities one of the key objectives of the program, as well as allowing receipts from stewardship projects to ensure adequate reforestation through the KV fund. The 2014 and 2018 Farm Bills gave the Forest Service new authority to conduct insect and disease treatments and hazardous fuel reduction work on up to 3,000 acres of National Forest System lands at a time under Section 602. These authorities have proven effective in reducing hazardous fuels. Section 602 projects have performed well and they have encountered wildfires. In every case where the Forest Service has completed all the steps of the fuel reduction process, the treatments have reduced flame length, fire intensity, and rate of spread. However, the scope of the program is too limited. The committee should move to substantially increase the number of acres covered by Section 602 categorical exclusions. This section does not open a single new acre of land to timber harvest and requires compliance with forest plans. It allows the Forest Service to quickly approve needed treatments after a brief review, rather than engaging in lengthier NEPA processes that can delay projects for as much as 5 years or more. Our written testimony includes further recommendations for your consideration. FFRC has always appreciated the bipartisan pragmatic approach to forest management that this committee has demonstrated. With nearly half of the national forest system off limits to management, we urge you to continue to build on the authorities you've already enacted to make sure that we can manage the rest of these critical lands sustainably. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our witnesses for testimony. I see two of our colleagues on camera. And so I would ask Ms. Schreier or Mr. Johnson if you would consider taking the gavel as I need to no longer chair this hearing. My apologies to the witnesses. Would either of you, in order to proceed with questions, be willing to take the gavel for the remainder of our time or for some portion thereof?
Ms. Spanberger, I would of course defer to Ms. Schreier, but I am making my way down to third floor now and could, at least on a short-term basis, spell you or others.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. So, Ms. Schreier, I will recognize you first for questions, and then Mr. Johnson will take over chairing the committee as soon as he is here. My apologies to the witnesses. I do want to thank you for your testimony, both given and written. I have a meeting with the speaker about my legislation, which is why I must excuse myself, but I'm very grateful for your time, and I will leave you in good hands with Mr. Johnson. Ms. Schreier, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Earlier this morning, I spoke with Chief Moore about programs impacting forests on federal land, and I want to turn my attention now to private land and private forests now. There are over 620,000 acres of privately owned forest lands in my district and over 9 million acres in Washington state. Private forests are often sustainably managed to provide clean air, clean water, and wildlife habitat. They also provide a steady, renewable supply of wood, which supports rural markets and jobs within my district. They often also use proper forest management practices, particularly for brush and tree thinning, in order to help protect against wildfires, and they do it quite successfully. Mr. Reed, as you know, timely and appropriate brush removal and tree thinning that reduces wildfire risk and gives trees and wildlife some space to grow and flourish is critical in our home state. Could you speak a bit more about Green Diamond's expertise in forest management here, and what are the different benefits that these practices provide?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Congressman. It's true that the interests of private forest landowners are mostly in healthy forests, and that has obviously impact on our core business, but also many secondary positive effects on clean water and clean air and habitat, and not incidentally a significant reduction in wildfire risk. So we manage our forests with that in mind. It's not inexpensive. And we consider the treatment of forests to be investments in the future health and longevity of those forests and its resilience against the natural pests and fires and whatnot. It's not a silver bullet, but it does work. And we had the experience, as I mentioned before, we had a significant wildfire across onto us in Oregon, similar forest type to your district. And where we had engaged in active thinning, removing stems either through commercial harvest or pre-commercial harvest, we saw fire activity significantly change. We watched it across the landscape where we were a neighbor to the Forest Service, which for any number of reasons, I have a lot of appreciation for the challenges the Forest Service had. They had not done any thinning and the trees had completely wiped out. When it hit our ground, we still lost a lot of trees, but the fire behavior changed. It gave us an opportunity to address the forest. So I feel very confident that the things that the forest management activities that private forest owners engage in, again, it's not a panacea, it won't solve everything, but it's certainly.
Thank you for that stewardship. And that example is exactly why we have put so many resources into the Forest Service and trying to have year-round jobs that will manage our public lands as well. Can I just quickly get your perspective on the wood products industry? We heard earlier about using every part of trees and how every part has value. And if you could talk a little bit about what that means for rural economies and forest health and for forest landowners, and maybe the role of small diameter mills in that ecosystem.
Yeah, there's no question that those small diameter trees provide a much more significant economic challenge than the more valuable larger trees. And when you're operating on a 100-year timescale like we are, though, you have to figure out how to address all of the issues in the forest. And sometimes the issue is too many small trees. And I think there are lots of programs that can be implemented to help promote the use of those small diameter material, but particularly in certain areas where we have lost infrastructure that processes it, and in areas where you're thinking about a 100-mile haul for this type of small, low-value wood with $5, $6, $7 diesel prices, it's really tough. And in many cases, it's simply uneconomic, even for a commercial owner to treat forests without it being a cost. So it's a challenge. There's no question about it. We're able to do it because we consider it an investment in our long-term future, but it's not a moneymaker.
Understandable. That 100-mile haul is something I hear about frequently in the district, and that's why I'm looking to bring a small diameter mill to the 8th district. So thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schreier, and I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. And my question will be for Mr. Schultz. I just think, sir, about if we're really going to treat these millions of acres of both federal land and non-federal land as is called for in the 10-year plan, how are we going to get that done? It seems to me, sir, that you simply can't get that done without commercial partners and without infrastructure like sawmills to be able to do something with those forest products. Let me give you an opportunity, sir. To what extent am I wrong about that? And if I'm right, give us more of a sense of why.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman. So you're absolutely correct. One of the things to think about, you need to have that milling infrastructure on the landscape. So it's critical that we retain that infrastructure. And it's not just the sawmills, but it's the logging and hauling workforce that's also accompanies that. So if we just focus on small diameter wood, which I'm not suggesting anybody's saying that, but that is problematic, that cannot sustain the industry into itself and sustain all of that infrastructure. So you need to be able to partner with the mills. The mills need to be healthy. You need to have a healthy logging workforce and a hauling workforce as well. So those are all critical to being able to manage the national forest. Other partners that have been discussed previously, it's the states. I'm convinced that the Forest Service alone, as you've heard a lot of their challenges on hiring individuals, cannot get the work done alone without states, without NGOs, and without the industry. So we do need partnerships across. You heard Ms. Humphreys talk about the Wild Turkey Federation, and they're a tremendous partner with the Forest Service in terms of the work that they do. So anyhow, we do need partnerships, but you cannot lose the infrastructure that exists, both the mills and the logging and the hauling workforce. It's absolutely critical.
Mr. Reed, I'll give you an opportunity to feed into the conversation as well.
Sure. No, I think that Mr. Schultz covered a lot of the key points. I would say that private forest landowners are happy to work in partnership with public forest landowners simply from a risk mitigation point of view. And while the core of our business is not harvesting on federal timber ground, we recognize that we have to be good neighbors to them too. And if we want to mitigate the risk of fire or disease onto our own ground, we have to be willing to engage. And as I said, I'm appreciative of Chief Moore's willingness to engage with private sector partners to try to achieve some of the goals that he's trying to get, that we're all trying to get.
Yeah, very well said. And to tie this up, I would just note that we know that there are some policies that make it more difficult to manage the forest. And a managed forest is a healthy forest. And when our policies cause certain pieces of these infrastructure, you talked about human infrastructure, that's a big one. Sawmills, that's a big one. When these pieces of infrastructure decay or erode or go away, it is unbelievably difficult, and in some cases near impossible to build them back up. And I think that's why we want to make sure that when we talk about the sustainability of the forests, and of course we should, we want to understand that policies, that part of that sustainability is keeping that infrastructure intact. With that, unless there are any other members who seek to be recognized, I want to thank our panelists. They've done an excellent job informing the committee's work. And of course, I also want to thank Chair Spanberger for her leadership in pulling this together and for her ill-advisedly trusting me with the gavel for at least a short period of time. With that, under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any question posed by a member. And unless there's anything further, this hearing of the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry is adjourned.